The following podcast contains mature themes and is intended for an adult audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to part 3 of 3 in our discussion around question 153, article 5 of part 2 of the second part of the Summa Theologica, which poses the question whether the daughters of lust are rightly described. In the first part, we went through the first effect of lust, which is a blindness of the mind. In the second part, we went through all the other effects of lust. And now we're coming to the replies to the objections which had been put forward right at the beginning of the article. So let's proceed. But before we proceed, I'd just like to remind you that this is part 3 of a 3-part mini series within this broader podcast. And to really understand what we'll be speaking about, you do have to listen to episode 39 and episode 40 before we get to episode 41. So just to bring yourself up to speed, I'd strongly suggest that you do go back and listen to episodes 39 and 40 so that you understand exactly what it is that we're discussing and the point from which we are picking up, which is the reply to objection 1. Reply to objection 1. Remember that first objection was saying that this enumeration is not fitting because it has a lot to do with prudence. And that is a powerful objection, and it's very, very true. And remember those things which we listed in terms of so first of all, step back. What is prudence? Prudence is a intellectual virtue, a virtue of the intellect through which we reason correctly about our actions. What does that mean? There are some actions which we do whose goal is outside of ourselves, like building a house. There are some actions which we do whose goal is within ourselves, meaning it builds ourselves. It has an impact on who we are as human beings. So for instance, waking up on time or praying. So prudence very much is focused on that second category. Actions whose goal, whose end is within ourselves. They make us or they break us. Or they always make us into something. So make us into something good or something bad, etc. So prudence is right reason in doing. And then the virtue of the intellect, which has to do with making things outside of ourselves, is called art. Right reason in making. So prudence and art are they're kind of like cousins or brother and sister. Very similar, not exactly the same. Now, all those things which we spoke about, where we said, apprehend what is good, and then seek advice, seek counsel, either from your own memory or from people who are alive or people who are dead, read books, talk to people, etc. And then deliberate, weigh it up, judge, what should I do? And then command that this is the course of action, take action, do this. All those 4 movements of the intellect through which it apprehends what is good and seeks counsel and deliberates or judges and commands an action, all of those have to do with actions which remain within ourselves, and thus those are the 4 motions of prudence. That's what the first objection is saying. The first objection was saying, hey, all of this good stuff is got to do with prudence, not lust. This is St. Thomas's reply to that objection. He says, according to the philosopher in Ethics 6:5, intemperance is the chief corruptive of prudence. Wherefore the vices opposed to prudence arise chiefly from lust, which is the principal species of intemperance. In other words, put simply, the main cause of foolishness in the world today is lust. And as I was watching this film called The Sound of Freedom. I think it's called Sound of Freedom. The one with Jim Caviezel, where they go into some kids who are trafficked for sex trafficking purposes. Then they rescue them. It's a very powerful film. If you haven't watched it, watch it. I'm plugging it. Go watch that film. But one of the statistics which is put on screen, I think it's at the start of the film or not at the end of the film. I don't remember. It was just harrowing. The harrowing statistic was something along the lines of 70% of traffic on the internet is pornography. To something like that. I just remember thinking, whoa, that's a lot. Of all traffic on the internet is pornography. That is incredible. And that means there are a lot of people who are prisoners of lust. And the reason why, if you're to ask yourself, why is the world seemingly becoming more and more foolish? Why is, why does it, why does it seem that the number of fools on earth is just increasing? Lust is the reason why, because lust makes people act imprudently. It makes people fail to apprehend what is good, which is the first step of prudence. It makes people not seek counsel, not try and remember what's good or bad, or seek advice, which is rashness, second result of lust. It makes them fail to deliberate and to weigh up the different points of view and the different information that they receive, which is thoughtlessness, another effect of lust, which again is an aspect of imprudence. And then it makes them weak and inconstant. They're just not able to say, this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm committing to doing. Just think of the sheer number of men who have wrecked their marriages and have wrecked their families through the inconstancy that is caused by lust. And so they have a child here and a child there and a child there and a child there and a child everywhere. And families are just like left in ruins because of this thing, lust. So St. Thomas is saying, yes, correct, imprudence. These are the things, rashness, thoughtlessness, etc., inconstancy. These are the results of, these are the hallmarks of imprudence. But guess what? They're predominantly caused by lust. That's what he means here. Reply to objection 2. Remember, objection 2 was attacking inconstancy and said inconstancy is a result of, it has to do with fortitude, not temperance, and lust has to do with temperance, so inconstancy is not one of the results of lust. St. Thomas says, the constancy, which is a part of fortitude, regards hardships and objects of fear. But constancy, in refraining from pleasures, pertains to continence, which is a part of temperance as stated above. Hence, the inconstancy which is opposed thereto is to be reckoned a daughter of lust. Nevertheless, even the first named inconstancy, where a person is unable to pursue something that is good and something that is difficult in a consistent way, in a regular way, that first named inconstancy, it comes from lust. Inasmuch as the latter, the lust, makes the mind weak, the latter enfeebles a man's heart and renders it effeminate, according to Hosea. Fornication and wine and drunkenness take away the understanding. And Vegetius, too, says that the less a man knows of the pleasures of life, the less he fears death. So in other words, lust makes a person inconstant. He's just recapping what we spoke about in the body of the article. Reply to objection 3. Remember the third objection was the one about self-love, that self-love extending to the contempt of God. When a person loves himself so much that they hate God, this is the origin of every sin. So you shouldn't just lay it solidly, squarely at the door of lust. That's kind of unfair. It's the origin of every sin. And Thomas says self-love in respect to any goods that a man desires for himself is the common origin of all sins. Yes, that's true. But in the special point of desiring carnal pleasures for themselves, it is reckoned a daughter of lust. Hence, St. Josemaria Escriva, I think it's in The Way, or one of his books says, hidden pride, manifest lust. Hidden pride, manifest lust. In other words, if you're proud, if you have the vice of pride, and you manage to keep it hidden, you can't keep it hidden because it's going to show forth in lust, in the vice of lust. What's the connection here? Remember, pride is a disordered desire for an excellence that is not one's own. In other words, you look at yourself and then you say, I want to be at this level. But that's not where you're supposed to be in terms of who you are, how you've been designed, in terms of the God who made you. But you say, no, I want to be like God. And the immediate effect of that is they realize they were naked, going back to that Genesis account. So in other words, where self-love has to do with anything, whether it's money, possessions, glory, fame, honor, yes, that's the origin of all sins. But when it comes now specifically to sexual pleasures, where a person now, because of pride and wanting an excellence that's not theirs, and they say, I am deserving to have every sexual pleasure, everything must exist at my service to make me feel pleasurable, then that is one of the daughters, one of the results of lust. And the fourth and final objection was, Isidore mentions 4 daughters of lust, namely obscene, scurrilous, wanton, and foolish talking, Therefore, the aforesaid enumeration would seem to be superfluous. So basically, that's that long list which St. Thomas gave: blindness of mind, thoughtlessness, inconstancy, rashness, self-love, hatred of God, love of this world, abhorrence or despair for a future world. According to Isidore, that's too long. There's actually far fewer daughters of lust. They are namely, all of them have to do with speech. And these are obscene, scurrilous, wanton, and foolish talking. St. Thomas says, the sins mentioned by Isidore are inordinate external acts pertaining in the main to speech, wherefore there is a fourfold inordinateness. So he's saying, yeah, St. Isidore is right. But the point is that he's only speaking about external acts. I had been speaking about internal acts. But now that you want to speak about external acts, okay, let's speak about external acts with respect to the realm of speaking. Let's go into it. First, on account of the matter, and to this we refer obscene words. So the person who has given into lust, one of the results of that is they use obscene words. For since out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. The lustful man, whose heart is full of lewd concupiscences, readily breaks out into lewd words. I think we all know people like this. Secondly, on account of the cause. So remember, now he's speaking about the words themselves. One of the results of lust is when a person speaks, the words that they themselves use are lewd words. Secondly, on account of the cause of those words. For since lust causes thoughtlessness and rashness, remember we spoke about this, the result is that it makes a man speak without weighing or giving a thought to his words. He does not speak, he does not deliberate, he does not think before he speaks, he just speaks. Such words are described as scurrilous. Remember, the word scurry has a connotation of running. So these words just fall out. He doesn't think about, in other words, he doesn't deliberate, doesn't think, he lets his words fall to the ground, using an Old Testament turn of phrase. He doesn't think about what he's saying. So his words are scurrilous. They're just rushed. They're heedless words. So that's in with respect to not the words themselves, but with respect to the cause of the words themselves, which is he has not thought about what he says, so he just speaks randomly. And that's scurrilous speaking. Thirdly, on account of the end, the goal to which these words are directed. Remember, we spoke about the words themselves, the cause of the words, and now the goal to which these words are directed. When a person is in the throes of lust, since the lustful man seeks pleasure, he directs his speech towards pleasure, and so gives utterance to wanton words. So what's the difference between wanton words and scurrilous words? So scurrilous words are words which are not measured. You don't think about what you want to say, you just say it. This is one of the effects of lust. Wanton words are words whose goal is pleasure. So you say them because the words themselves give you a kind of almost, let's call it sexual pleasure in the way you speak. So sexting is an example of wanton words. Catcalls, when people see a woman walking along the street and then they start making all sorts of funny, they say things to her, they make funny noises. Those are examples of wanton words. Of course, the two are connected. There's a lack of thoughtlessness as the cause, but at the end goal is a sense of wanting to gain pleasure from those words themselves. So wanton words are words which give us some kind of inordinate sexual pleasure. And examples of that include sexting or those catcalls, which unfortunately some people harass women with. Fourthly, on account of the sentiments expressed by his words, for through causing blindness of mind, lust perverts a man's sentiments, and so he gives way to foolish talking. For instance, by expressing a preference for the pleasures he desires to anything else. Typical example of this is, I'm sure I've come across this on WhatsApp groups, unfortunately, where you find that the only thing this person is capable of speaking about is the things that have to do with sex. So the country could be burning. There could be, I don't know, huge natural disaster, floods, famine, earthquake. The only thing he can share is an image or a joke or something that has to do with female anatomy. That's it. That's like as far as this person can can go in their thinking. So this is what St. Thomas means. Lust perverts a man's sentiments. He's not even able to have empathy. And so he gives way to foolish talking, for instance, by expressing a preference for the pleasures he desires to anything else. So that brings us to the end of this three-part discussion around the effects of lust or the daughters of lust. And just to recap really quickly, you have the ones which affect the way a person thinks or that affect the intellect. And these are blindness of mind, thoughtlessness, inconstancy, and rashness. And then you have the ones which affect our will in terms of what we actually want. And those include self-love, hatred of God, and love of this world. And as a result, despair for a future world. And then, almost as an added on bonus, right at the end, when discussing one of the objections, and this is why objections are so useful. This is why controversy is so useful. You know, that economist, John Stuart Mill, in an essay on liberty, speaks about why controversy is good. And one of the reasons he gives as controversy being good is that controversy forces you, by not running away from controversy, by facing controversy, it forces you to think through the position which you hold. And actually, by explaining it better to someone, you don't hold it as a kind of dogma which, you know, you just hold because you can't understand it, but you actually try and get to the roots of it and understand what it is that you believe and why it is that you believe what you believe. And often in that process, you get some new insights about your own position and you end up believing it even better or more thoroughly, and you can explain it better to other people. That's actually one of the things which I love about the Catholic Church and about Catholic theology. You see, Catholicism never shies away from controversy. It always just takes it on board and uses it as a tool, as an avenue to deeply and better understand its own teachings and its own positions. And that's exactly what happened with this final objection, which gave a list of things that had to do with speech. And St. Thomas, in replying to that objection, said, hey, guess what? Lust also affects the way in which we speak, and he just breaks it down and really explains the different ways in which lust affects how we speak, which is kind of like an added on bonus. Anyway, it was a long three-part series, but I think it was definitely worth it because this is such a contemporary issue. I think it's actually just, you know, been with mankind since the fall. You know, when Adam had that fruit, the first thing he noticed was that he was naked, which speaks to the fact that his lower powers no longer were subject to his higher powers. His desire for sex was no longer easily subject to his reason and will. And since that time, we as mankind have struggled with this thing. And it's one of the key ways in which the devil tempts people. Why? Because it is a pleasure that is connatural to us. It's part of our human nature to want to have sex. And so it's a very easy way in which he tempts people and gets people to fall. That's why it's such a common capital sin. 70% of the traffic on the internet is pornography. That's a shocking statistic. But that's why this topic is so important to go into and to understand and to think carefully about and to keep reminding ourselves about it over and over again. Because the more we know about it, the better formed we are, and the more clearly, like that herbalist in the forest, we can easily and quickly deduce this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. That's the process of formation. It's not fun, but man, it's important.